Welcome to I Need to Know Show, a production of the Public Trust Network. This show was created to inform Americans about the concerns and particular needs of the Puerto Rican community throughout the United States. However, our audience is not Puerto Ricans. Rather, the American public at large, who actually have the power that Puerto Ricans do not have. That is, to decide if Puerto Rico can be treated equally as all Americans under the Constitution. What, you may ask? This is not my opinion. This is what the United States Supreme Court has stated in several court decisions over the years. Many of you have heard of Puerto Rico, but many Americans do not even know where it is. What is sad to note is ever since World War I, Puerto Ricans have fought in every conflict around the world to support this nation and its principles of freedoms enshrined in the Constitution. Puerto Ricans have fought in Korea, Kuwait, Iraq, and around the world so that these people have the right to vote in a democracy of their making for their nation. Yet, Puerto Ricans on the island cannot vote themselves for their president or to have a voting voice in the Congress that sends them to war. In fact, the Supreme Court of the United States has clearly stated that Puerto Rico is governed by what is called the Territorial Clause of the Constitution and is governed by Congress. And Congress controls what rights and privileges apply to Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans on the island. The Equal Protection Clause, which covers you and me, does not apply to Puerto Ricans on the island. This program is designed to educate Americans on this issue and to create a national platform for stateside Puerto Ricans to discuss this issue and bring it to their senators and congressmen. Puerto Ricans on the island are American citizens, but are not treated like American citizens. We do not advocate for statehood or independence. That is for the citizens of the island to determine. But we Americans do have a voice on how our Constitution is applied. I want to welcome everybody to I Need to Know, part of the Public Trust Network. And thank you so much. It's taking a continuing series of interviews that we've had with leaders within the Puerto Rican community from around the country. We have, go to our YouTube site. You'll be able to see the interviews with the president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association of Chicago, Illinois, the vice president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association of New York, and most recently the president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association of Florida, all of which is leading up to this national conference of Puerto Rican Bar Associations, which we consider to be a national platform for the issues of Puerto Rico. And now we're going to begin a series of interviews of individuals who are actually lecturing during the 3-day conference. By the way, just so you know, it's not limited to lawyers. Lawyers are the influencers, which we're trying to give some information to, but it's actually open to everybody who wants to learn about Puerto Rico. And because part of our mission is to train and teach non-Puerto Ricans the situation of Puerto Rico, we really encourage anyone who's interested in Puerto Rico and the situation to have the constitutional questions, the migration questions, the social issues. If you're interested in knowing because you're in an area that has lots of Puerto Ricans and you'd like to learn, or you're married to a Puerto Rican, there's a lot of them going around. We can really learn. So we invite you, and there'll be no cost to those people who are not lawyers and would just like to learn. And we're not charging anything to those people who just want to come and listen and learn. So please know that that's part of what's called the National Conference of the Puerto Rican Bar Associations. It's coming up September 28th, 29th, and 30th. And so with us today are two of our guest lecturers, and they're people who are really well versed in the situation of Puerto Rico, in Florida, and actually in the United States. And today, my questioning of them has to do with their areas of expertise. Then I'm going to take them through a series of hypotheticals and see where it takes us. So let's start with my good friend Roberto Cruz. Roberto, please describe to us. You work for an organization called Latino Justice, previously called the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. And let me talk a little bit about that because I was there. I'm so old already, that I was there when they started creating this thing. And remember, the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, now called Latino Justice, was sort of, and we still consider it, those of us who are in the community, the NAACP of the Puerto Rican community. What you don't know, perhaps you don't know, but in the 1950s, when you had that great migration of Puerto Ricans from the island to New York, created all sorts of problems, including bilingual education, voter access, and a bunch of civil rights problems, which created the necessity of both the creation of the Puerto Rican Bar Association of New York, which was started in 1957, and the creation of what's then called the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, now called the Latino Justice. So, given that background, Roberto, will you give us a little bit of what you guys are doing today? And if you'd like to, expand on the history of it, please do so.
Well, first of all, thank you, Tony, for the opportunity to address your audience, and thank you for the invitation to your program. For those who don't know me, my name is Roberto Cruz. I'm the managing attorney for the Southeast Office of Latino Justice PRODEF, formerly the Puerto Rican Legal Education and Defense Fund. Latino Justice, or PRODEF, was founded in 1972 by three brilliant young Puerto Rican lawyers who made a bold move using the legal system to challenge the inequities inflicted on the Puerto Rican diaspora in New York City. We're talking about our three founding fathers, Jorge Batista, Victor Marrero, and Cesar Perales. They launched the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund as a civil rights organization modeled, like Tony said, on the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. Now, today, we're not only representing the Puerto Rican community in New York, but we're representing Latinos throughout the United States. And in order to befit our new mission, we have switched our name to Latino Justice. And we are a national nonprofit that played a profound role in the advancing our values of equity and justice through the Latinx community in the United States, the archipelago of Puerto Rico, and for others, as well as fostering the next generation of Latinx leaders in the legal field and in our community. So we've had some major milestones in New York and in Florida, also in the island of Puerto Rico and the island of Vieques, which is part of the archipelago. And we're very proud of our history and proud to serve the Florida community.
Now, I can tell you that, of course, you do current litigation. Could you describe us the type of litigation you're doing now, particularly in Florida?
In Florida, right at this moment, we're engaged in two cases that have made national news. The first one would have to do with Purnell versus the state of Florida. In that specific case, we are challenging the rules that have been imposed regarding the type of curriculum that can be taught in colleges and universities, particularly in the areas of racial justice and economic justice. We could talk about this in a whole nother program.
Yeah, yes. And you've also been involved with the litigation that has to do with electoral access to the ballot.
Yes.
And stuff like that. So there's a real important missions that the PRODEF, the Latino Justice is involved in. I just throw in here, by the way, as form of junction before I move on to Dr.
Oh, we lost Tony. Uh,
The Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund changed its name to Latino Justice precisely for the change of the mission, as you've indicated, right? But one of the things that when I was president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association of New York, and when I was president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association of Florida, always there's been this pressure to change our name to join into the Hispanic bar. And one of the reasons we did not change our name was precisely because when you join a group of Hispanic, you get inundated with the problem of immigration, and so in the Hispanic community, the major issue you could clearly say is the question of immigration, the rights of immigration. We did not want to, when I was in New York and when I was in Florida, did not want to subsume the problem of Puerto Rico, because otherwise there would be no one else, yeah, screaming about Puerto Rico if we just became part of the Hispanic Bar Association. It's just a historical note for our listeners as to why the Puerto Rican Bar Association still exists in Chicago, New York, and Florida, and why we are calling for this national conference, a national platform of all these Puerto Rican bar associations from around the country, including Puerto Rico, of course, the original, but calling for them to have a national platform precisely because, the problems of Puerto Rico haven't gone away and they need to have attention by someone who cares about them. So that's a no. So with us, the next guest is, of course, is a longtime friend of mine, Dr. Fernando Rivera, who is the director, we call the Puerto Rican Research Hub at the University of Florida, Central Florida, University of Central Florida. Now, this organization, he'll describe its purpose, but it certainly is an offshoot, a replica, an attempt to do the great work that has been done in the city of New York and at CUNY, the City University of New York, which has a research hub that's done much great work in New York and around the nation. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Fernando Rivera. If you could give us a little background on the research hub and what you are doing in Central Florida.
No, absolutely. So thank you for having me, and glad to be on the panel with Roberto as well. So you're right. I mean, some of the issues that we follow out here, and there's a connection between New York and Florida and Puerto Rico. Obviously, by 2017, Florida becomes a state with the most Puerto Ricans stateside. So that becomes kind of like the issue, and it happens to be the exodus of people from Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria as well. So those combinations of factors sort of led to, the creation of the Puerto Rico Research Hub, and that was an effort that had been going on for a while. And kind of like some of the pressures that you were talking about in terms of, for many years trying to push the issue, and they were saying, no, you need to be more inclusive of bringing other Hispanic groups and all those type of things. But if you look at the statistics here in Central Florida, the growth of the Hispanic population in Central Florida right now has been the growth of the Puerto Rican population. So we are very blessed and lucky here at the University of Central Florida that this is happening in our backyard. And what other institution that the one that is there in the center of it all to study these issues. So in a nutshell, we are the center of activities dedicated to the study of Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans at the University of Central Florida. And we do four things. Obviously, we do academic research that includes, sort of keeping an eye on the demographic changes, but also studying the social aspects of hurricanes and displacement, some of the health issues. Unfortunately, Puerto Ricans as a group tend to have the worst public health indicators when compared to other Latino groups, and sort of the importance of really looking at specific Latino, Hispanic groups when we're doing this type of research. Second, we provide opportunities for students to engage in research. And I think that's been the mission of us, of utilizing research to really move forward the educational mission of the university and the hub. Third, we do outreach, and this is an example of outreach, right? Basically, not only doing the research, but actually taking that research out into the community, going on these opportunities that we have, public events, media interviews, podcasts, all those type of issues. And lastly, partnerships. Here are great partners because we cannot do this alone. We need the support of the community out here, and we've been very blessed to have the support out here. And when we started here, this in the summer of 2018, really it touched a nerve in the community. I think for a long time the community was they had a thirst for what was going to be the place of UCF in this journey, and we're happy to being here in the system for 5 years. We've done a lot of things, continue to do a lot of things out here, and continue to do that because in the case people of your listeners don't know, UCF in 2019 became a Hispanic serving institution. That means that 25% or more of the student body comes from a Hispanic Latino background and has some type of financial need. And I will care to say that a lot of that growth has been the growth of the Puerto Rican population. And with that, UCF is on the top five producers of undergrad degrees in the United States. So a lot of impact, a lot of issues going on.
All right, so you gave me the perfect segue for why I invited you two guys to be on this show because I'm in Rincon, Puerto Rico at the moment. And, you know, when you go through the town, there's some very distinctive um, attributes, let's put it, to the town of Rincon. Because what we know demographically, Puerto Rico has lost over 600,000 residents in the last I think it's the last 2 decades. It went from 3.1, excuse me, from 3.8 to about 3.1 is the last research information that I have. So it's a lot of that's a lot of people. When you come to Rincon and you go down the streets, you notice that there is many Anglos walking the streets of Rincon as they are Puerto Ricans on the Rincon. So the question I'm start with you, Professor. Um, what does these demographic trends tell us about the future of the island?
Yeah, no, a good observation, right? And if you look at the numbers, Puerto Rico has lost a lot of population. The Puerto Rican population in New York has decreased as well, and it has increased in Florida. Rincon, I think, was one of the few towns in Puerto Rico that actually had population growth in the last years. And obviously, it's a very nice area. I just visited a couple of months ago, but there are incentives to go there, right? But it tells you volumes about the bifurcated reality of Puerto Rico between the haves and the have-nots, and that's something just recently there was a news report that actually talked about that because we due to the financial crisis that is ongoing in Puerto Rico, uh, governments are forced to bring in capital one way or the other. So in Rincon, it's a perfect place, beautiful scenery, but there's a lot of incentives for people to come there. So the ones that have the resources can take advantage of that. Uh, you know, go into an apartment, do all those type of things. But it shows you that the consequences of that population loss have really has impacted a lot out here. And Rincon is also an interesting example that you bring because they're being pushed back, especially a condominium that they wanted to build a pool next to the ocean, and there was sort of a big pushback and saying like the national resources, we need to respect them. And so there's been kind of like this always this tension between the newcomers, the outsiders, and the ones that have been in Puerto Rico and that have suffered from the policies that's been a little bit restrictive in terms of the use of public funds for every single service that you have on the island.
So let me ask you a question, maybe within your expertise, perhaps not. But I have done some research on demographics around the world, like what's happening in China, what's happening in Russia. And often they're talking about terminal demographics. And when they talk about that is that they're just not having enough children to replace their children they have. Puerto Rico seems to be in that spiral where they're losing the natural population, what's being replaced by other people who are not naturally from Puerto Rico, that being, immigrants from other places. Is Puerto Rico in a death spiral?
Well, I wouldn't say a death spiral per se. Obviously, if you look at the numbers, Puerto Rico is close to 25% of the population 65 and older. So there's a population imbalance there. And that brings a lot of challenges in terms of future economic growth. And if you look at the profile of the people that are exiting Puerto Rico, is people in their 30s, their 40s, families with young children, and that's not necessarily a recipe for continuous population and economic growth. But if you put it in a sense, Japan, advanced economies like Japan are having that same problem. Japan is the number one in terms of the elderly population out there. But that causes some of those frictions out there. And this recently came up in the media cycles out there in Puerto Rico. But it's a concern, and I think now with the reconstruction and the funding that is available, if the government and the people that are pushing that can actually work on the basic social conditions, that we have good education, that we have safety, that we have reliable access to electricity and internet, all those type of things, then they can possibly be a bounce back out there. But this is also, if you look at developed world trends, people nowadays are having fewer children. And this is a problem for even the United States, but also places like you would imagine, like Italy, Spain, and other European countries that they're going through that. So I don't think that the case of Puerto Rico is necessarily that unique. But I think right now there's an opportunity to actually reverse some of those changes. So we remain very hopeful that with the reconstruction funds, you can lay the foundation for a resurgence of the population.
Oh, yeah, perfect segue. I mean, this is perfect. Roberto, the professor talks about funding and getting money for development and the social atmosphere here and things that require some government interaction. But the problem is that Puerto Rico doesn't control all this future. So we have a situation where Puerto Ricans are not treated equally as all Americans because Puerto Rico is a territory. And because it's a territory, it's governed by the territorial clause of the Constitution, and Congress can do what it wants. So it can make a distinction on your Social Security benefits. It can make a distinction on your Medicaid benefits. It can make a distinction in your transportation benefits. It can make a distinction on every type of funding that goes to the island because they can, because the 14th Amendment no longer protects Puerto Ricans on the island. So, from a legal point of view, in the Legal Defense Fund, is there a solution to this? What can be done about that?
Well, thank you, Tony. And before I begin, I want to say, Professor Rivera, thank you so much for your enlightening comments. Every time that you talk, I listen and I get more enriched by it. So thank you for your contribution. Well, Tony, what you ask is a very complicated question, as you know. In the island right now, with Puerto Rico being part of the territorial clause of the U.S. Constitution, Congress really has a lot of power and influence in the way that people in the archipelago can conduct their business. Right now, since 1998, Puerto Rico has been under the protectorate of the United States, a lot of political solutions have been proposed, as well as judicial solutions. When we're talking about judicial solutions, our organization has litigated cases identified as the insular cases to try to define this relationship between between Puerto Rico and the United States. In terms of political solutions, a lot of formulas have been explored, one being statehood, another one being free association, of course, independence, and our current Commonwealth status. Some people have called for an improved Commonwealth. Now, in Congress, there have been several attempts to try to deal with this problem politically and not through the courts. Just to give you a couple of examples, back in 2021, there were two bills that were filed. One was sponsored by the Puerto Rico resident commissioner, Jennifer Gonzalez, and our own Florida Congressman, Darren Soto. That one would, if it had been approved, would allow for Puerto Ricans to vote yes or no on a statehood referendum. There was also a competing bill called the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act. That one was moved more by Nita Velázquez from New York, also Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez from New York. That one explored or gave more options for Puerto Ricans to vote on a plebiscite that included the three major options, which are statehood, free association, and independence. Of course, in the end, both sides of the aisle, the ones that were mostly leading the Puerto Rico Statehood Act, and the other side, the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act, they kind of joined forces, and in 2022 filed the Puerto Rico Status Act, which actually was approved by the House in November of 2022, but unfortunately didn't get a vote in the Senate. Now that bill has now been reintroduced, and we're looking at 2023 with high expectations on what can we do in terms of a political solution to the Puerto Rican situation, and actually having some kind of definition of what it would be like to consider statehood, consider free association, have some.
Okay, let me just break in here because the people. I know you're being very, very careful in trying to stay neutral on this thing. I don't have to be that way. I'm just going to say, wait. You talked about possible solutions. We both all agreed that Puerto Rico has a funding problem to solve some of its problems, right? So the funding problem obviously comes from money that must come from Washington. Money coming from Washington depends on whether you have the political power, voting power, in order to allocate money towards you. Because Puerto Rico is a territory and not a state, it does not have the ability to have senators or congressmen hold the budget up, the national budget, until Puerto Rico got its fair share. So to be able to understand, right now we have a senator from Alabama who has decided that he wants to stop a certain policy. So this one senator puts a hold on all the promotions across the United States of all the military personnel. One senator has that kind of power. But Puerto Rico does not have that kind of power. It does not have the ability to stop the budget, to negotiate. It cannot. So therefore, the problem seems to be political. But you mentioned about seeking a court solution. And what you meant by that, I believe, you correct me if I'm incorrect, whether or not through the courts, through the Equal Protection Clause and the requirement that all American citizens be treated equally, that Puerto Ricans are being discriminated against under the 14th Amendment of the United States Equal Protection Clause, that we've been discriminated, therefore give us the funding that way. But the Supreme Court has already stated clearly and unequivocally that Puerto Rico is not sovereign, is governed by territorial clause, and the Congress can do whatever it wants with Puerto Rico. So a solution by the courts is not possible. The only solution now seems to be political. So now you have described different approaches of how to get to a political solution for Puerto Rico, either through statehood or through free association or another version of the current Commonwealth, which I choose called colony. Or so now because remember, you study American history. No taxation without representation. Whoa, that's led to a revolution. But Puerto Rico finds itself in a position that it cannot control this future. It just simply cannot control this future. And that's a fact, no matter how you sit on the political issue. So if it's going to come a solution, the solution must come politically, because we already had a decision by the court. There is no judicial solution. It's only a political solution, and there are different attitudes for that. So that's okay. So that's where we're at. The reason we have created this event that we're doing of the National Puerto Rican Bar Association is to create a national platform for people who are influenced, because lawyers are influencers no matter where they are. They can bring injunctions, they can bring petitions, they can run for office themselves, which gives them an amount of influence within the communities. But there is no national platform for this type of action. So whether you're for statehood or for independence or for something other, it has to be through the action of people who have the vote. And because Puerto Ricans do not have votes, the ones on the island do not have the vote, they can't do it. It does require then a look at a national look at people who can vote, who do have congressmen, who do have senators, to discuss this issue, which is why we created this concept of the National Puerto Rican. Hopefully this is the first year. Hopefully it will continue for many years and to go bigger and bigger, so eventually it becomes to the consciousness of all Americans, which leads then to the question, Professor, if 100% of the Puerto Ricans on the island said statehood, or 100% said independence, do they get it?
The answer, no. And this, obviously, this has been sort of the question for more than 120 years or so. Continuity, because I think the other solution is a social solution, right? When we create sort of a common front, where people, I think the problem with sometimes these discussions, right, even in the political and even the legal type of things, we forget who benefits from this system, right? And it's painfully obvious that somebody, not only in Puerto Rico but also here in the United States, benefits handsomely for this arrangement. And as long as we continue not to identify who's behind the continuous establishment of those rules and those laws, because this is where it gets into the political process as well. You mentioned that senator and that congressman or that congressperson, they get funded by somebody, whether it be a corporation, whether it be a political action pack, all those type of things. So I think we need to start also looking at a national agenda of the social consciousness of what is in the best interest of Puerto Ricans. And can we exercise that right? Whether it be in the courts, whether it be politically, or could it be, socially as well? And I think, this type of platforms does allow for that type of discussion out here in terms of that, because it's not a simple solution, right? I always surprised that complicated problems require complicated solutions. And in this case, it's not a matter of statehood yes or no, because that will bring other issues as well in terms of that. So I think we need to start to shifting that mentality in what are some of the long-term process of this, what are some of the short-term process that we can allow, and but most importantly, what is it that we want as a community, both the diaspora out here, both the people in Puerto Rico. And when we find that common ground, it's proven that it could help, right? If you think about, people were fed up with the response of the government of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and what they did, regardless if they were for pro statehood, pro independence, or pro Commonwealth, they got together and kicked the governor out, right? So
So
there's
yeah, that's right.
a lot of hope that that when we have a united cause, we can certainly find a solution.
And for those who are listening, we will have at our conference not just the bar associations and the presidents and some of the members, but we will have professors like Dr. Rivera from UCF. We will have the professor of the University of South Florida. We will have University of Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico professors. And I understand we're also having from the City University of New York, Carlos Gomez. Dr. Gomez is coming down for us. So we will have the intellectual elite of our community at this conference giving us their points of view. So I'm really looking forward to having that kind of a conversation. So Roberto, I'd like for you if you could address the question. I know you're going to be the panel. You're leading one of the panels, um, and I want you to touch on it, what you thought. But I also want you to touch on this issue. Assuming that one of these bills gets through Congress that allows Puerto Rico to have a vote, um, who gets to vote? Does the Puerto Rican who is just left Puerto Rico last year abandon the right to vote on the status of Puerto Rico, as opposed to the Dominican who just moved over and the established residents in Puerto Rico 6 months ago, but they get to vote on the status of Puerto Rico? What are the guideposts for this?
Well, that's a really good question, Tony, and that's one of the things that we are going to discuss at the Puerto Rican Bar Association's National Conference. We're going to have a specific CLE course where we're going to have people like Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez, Congressman Darren Soto. We're going to have members of the Puerto Rico diaspora, like civil rights attorney Philip Arroyo, and also University of Florida International University's Professor Elidelto Roman talked about the importance of this initiative, the Puerto Rico Status Act. Now, when we're talking about who would have the authority or the right to vote in this kind of measure, that's something that would also be decided by Congress through the discussion and the debate of this act. So that's why it is so important that organizations like the Puerto Rican Bar Associations of each state garner all the support that they have in order to have a voice and express their opinions on who would have the right to vote. Do the members of the Puerto Rican diaspora have the right to vote? Do people that have been residents of the island for more than 6 months or 1 year have a right to vote? Would people that are only born in the island would have to vote? All those questions would be answered once we have those congressional hearings, those debates, and it's so important that the voice of Puerto Ricans is heard through professional organizations like the Puerto Rican Bar. And this would be a great opportunity for the community to speak out, to talk, because with these people that are the decision makers, that are the ones that are going to persuade, that are going to represent you, they will be able to talk about your concerns. So think about this as a public hearing. The first part will be Professor Roman talking about the history of plebiscites, both in Puerto Rico and here in the United States. He's going to talk about things like, well, what if Puerto Rico decides to do its own plebiscite? Would that have to be honored by Congress? He's going to talk about some of the executive orders or executive statements made by the Trump administration and about the Obama administration about some of the results of the plebiscites in the island, whether they are legitimate or not, whether they will be respected by Congress or not. And they will also talk about the importance of having Congress look at this seriously through this particular measure. This is, for now, the most viable attempt to resolve the problem of Puerto Rico politically. And again, that's without counting out the possible judicial solutions, or like Professor Rivera has also brought up, the social solutions, which are almost or more important than the political ones. We at Latino Justice, we believe in community lawyering. That means that these kinds of movements are not led by lawyers, but that we are actually servants of the community. So if this is something that the community wants, then we'll support it. If it's not, then we'll look for other options. But right now, this is the forum to discuss the Puerto Rico Status Act. This is the time where the community will have a chance to be heard by Congressman Soto and by Congresswoman Gonzalez. So take a chance and visit us.
So if those of you who want, please note, under the screen we'll have the website at www.prba, as in Puerto Rican Bar Association, www.prbanationalconference.com, for you to get the information to please come. Again, if you're not a lawyer and you just want to come and listen to all the presentations, there's no charge for that. If you are a lawyer, the reason we're charging you is because we have nearly 12 credits approved by the Florida Bar for the courses that we're offering. So there's a significant value, not just to listen and network, but a significant value to the extent that you will get a CLE credit, which we all have to participate. And you may know that all funding for this thing goes to a non-for-profit law firm called the Legal Services Clinic of the Puerto Rican community, a non-for-profit law firm serving the poor and indigent of Central Florida, and something was launched by the Puerto Rican Bar Association of Florida after 2017 and Hurricane Maria. So this is all great information for all of us to learn. Please keep track. You can go to the Public Trust Network on YouTube, and you can see all the series of interviews that we've done with the lawyers from the past. So please join us there. And I want to show everybody, you know what I got here in front of me? Una quenepa. Y voy comiendo una quenepa desde Puerto Rico, and that's how you eat it. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good time. God bless.
Enseñar el view.
Okay.
Enseñar el view.
Okay. Gracias. Take care. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.